Hi, everybody. Welcome. While people are coming in, I think I'll pull up my introductory screen here. There we go. Just give people another couple of minutes. So I'll just give a little reminder for folks to put themselves on mute while we're waiting to get started. Nice to see everybody. Okay, I see that we're at 7 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the Green Shores Incentives Project information session. My name is DG Blair, and I'm Executive Director of the Stewardship Center for British Columbia. And while we're getting going, I think we will just call up our poll number 1, which I think I need to stop sharing to do. Is that correct, Robin? People get used to what? Oh, no, there we go. Well done. So if folks can just start answering those questions.
DG, may I just interrupt for one moment?
Absolutely.
Ron Beeg, I'm just inside Qualicum Beach. This impacts us directly or affects us directly. You have Qualicum Beach and Seacroft Road. Seacroft Road is right adjacent to our property, but we're in town limits of Qualicum Beach.
Well, you just choose whichever you prefer.
Very well, thank you.
Yep. Okay, we'll just give this another minute. And Ron, if I could ask you just to mute yourself there, please. And Robin, let's end polling. Looks like we've got a nice mixture between Comox Valley. Looks like Comox Valley is the largest, followed by Gartley Beach, and then Qualicum Beach. So let's just end that poll, please, Robin. And there we have the results. Okay. And I'll just stop sharing the results. Okay, thanks everybody for participating. We're going to be doing a few polls as we go through. And now that we've heard about a little bit of who you are, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Stewardship Center for British Columbia. So we are a provincial nonprofit organization with a mandate to strengthen ecological stewardship in British Columbia by providing educational, technical, and capacity programs and resources to organizations, governments, private sector, and the general public. And we always work through collaborative partnerships. Green Shores is a key program of the Stewardship Center. So now I'd like to turn it over to Luke Sales from the town of Qualicum Beach to provide some welcoming remarks.
Well, thank you, DG. Good evening, everyone. I'm Luke Sales. I'm the town's Director of Planning and Community Development. So Qualicum Beach has a long history as a waterfront community of changes. If you rewound the clock 100 years, you'd see a natural shoreline with a lot of processes in place, erosion and deposition, and really a dynamic environment. Starting in about 1940, especially into the 50s and 60s, the town took huge steps to interfere with those coastal processes. And I think we're dealing with many of the negative impacts that resulted from that still today. So about 5 or 10 years ago, the town really started to take this seriously and started to aggressively pursue more natural shoreline solutions to protect our beach, but also enhance the ecosystem. So we've been taking it seriously and very excited to have this partnership with the Stewardship Center of BC and these other municipalities and regional districts. So the specific location in Qualicum Beach was actually the result of a private initiative. They wanted to protect their own property and propose this green shore solution. One of the concerns expressed by the neighbors was, well, that might work for that property, but what would it do if we attack this at a neighborhood scale? So that's a great question, and that's how we ended up here today. So we're going to hear about what it would look like potentially if we approached it at a neighborhood scale. So it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. Thanks for taking the time this evening, and I look forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Luke. And now we'll have Robin Holm from Comox Valley Regional District. Robin?
Hi there, everyone. My name is Robin Holm, and I'm the long-range planner at the Comox Valley Regional District. The CVRD is really excited to be partnering with the Stewardship Center of BC and the town of Qualicum Beach on this project. The CVRD has been a part of the Green Shores Local Government Working Group since 2017. We joined this group to build capacity in-house with our staff, and as well to learn from other jurisdictions to find out what sorts of projects they're doing. The CVRD has policy and regulatory tools in place that encourage shoreline measures and works. And we jumped at the opportunity to be a part of this project because we wanted to use this as an opportunity to educate and increase the awareness about green shores as an option for shoreline management. With sea level rise and impacts from climate change, we would like to share this information with our community, and we're hoping that using this opportunity at Gartley Beach that we'll be able to see what a healthy shoreline could look like. I just wanted to share that Gartley Beach was selected as the location for this pilot project because it represents a diverse range of shoreline conditions. There is existing hard armoring, as well as having established marshes and gravel beaches. And we feel like this provides an opportunity for to be able to look at different project needs and possible solutions. So I'm really looking forward to Jessica's presentation. Thanks very much for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin and Luke. So now we will go to poll number 2, which is, what is your interest in the project? We're keeping Robin very busy with setting these up. Okay, you've got, we've got poll number 1 is up there. Maybe.
Still poll number 1.
Still.
Robin, try the relaunch polling button.
Okay.
I think if you hit the little.
Oh, there we are.
There we go.
We got it. Well done, Robin. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Okay, we'll just give it another couple of seconds. Okay, well, let's maybe end that polling there, Robin, because I think I pressed the button last time, so maybe I'm the one who messed things up. And it's looking like we've got a lot of shoreline properties owners, folks who are interested in learning more. And we've got a few consultants or contractors or realtors in the group. So that's great, really great to see everybody here. So let's stop sharing, please, and we'll move on to the next slide. So the agenda. So we've already gone through a few introductory remarks. I'm going to have a few slides on what Green Shores is all about, and specifically the Green Shores Incentives Project, followed by Jessica Wilson, who will be presenting the Northwest Hydraulics Report, Concept Designs for Neighborhood Scale Coastal Adaptation Measures. We'll then have opportunity for Q&A. In terms of meeting logistics, if you could please keep your camera off and mute yourselves during the presentations, and then you can turn it back on during the Q&A afterwards. If you would like to use the chat function to put questions in, you'll see on the bottom of your screen, there's a little icon that says chat. And you can type your question into that chat function, or you can hold your questions to the end of the presentations. So without further ado, we'll get going. And I always like to start with this photograph here. This is a before photograph of a project in Nanaimo, BC. And this is what it looks like after. So the homeowners on this project say becoming involved, reading and learning about the benefits of Green Shores through this project has been enlightening and fun. We look forward to enjoying the garden maturing and evolving with the hope of it being an inspiration for neighboring waterfront owners. And best of all, the birds love it. So this is an example of a local project that is a Green Shores Gold certified project. So given that, for you, what is your greatest concern regarding shoreline development? Back to the polls. And Robin, if you, there we go, thank you. We're keeping everybody busy here. There we go. Shoreline erosion, sea level rise, loss of coastal habitat and diversity, cost and effectiveness of nature-based solutions. It's good to see everybody being able to press their selection there. Good. It's great to see everybody participating. We'll just give it another few seconds. Oh, okay, let's finish end polling there, Robin. Okay, it looks like there's a lot of different concerns. The biggest one is loss of coastal biodiversity and habitat. That's great. That past project that we looked at was a big factor there. And obviously shoreline erosion and sea level rise are also concerns, along with the cost and effectiveness of these sorts of nature-based solutions versus hard armoring. Okay, let's stop sharing those results, please. And we'll move on to the next slide. So I'd like to just mention that Green Shores is a made in BC approach to coastal resilience. So it's really a great tool for climate change adaptation. It encourages best management practices that use nature-based approaches to protect land from erosion and flooding, including projected sea level rise. It helps to achieve multiple goals, such as shoreline stabilization, habitat restoration, and climate resilience, as well as increased aesthetic, recreational, and economic values. And I think one of the things that is really stressed is that it provides a framework to improve shoreline, to improve design and use by shoreline professionals, local governments, property owners, to improve shoreline asset management and values. So for those who aren't familiar, what is Green Shores? And I always like to say, think LEED for the shoreline, leadership in energy efficient design. The first credit and rating system came out in 2010, which was called Green Shores for Coastal Development. And then since then, we've added Green Shores for Homes, which is aimed at residential properties, Green Shores for Shoreline Development in 2020. And we're currently scaling out Green Shores across Canada with support from Natural Resources Canada and Environment and Climate Change Canada with a Nova Scotia pilot. So we're really excited to be moving on to that. So Green Shores is basically a standard that is based on 4 guiding principles. The first is that we want to restore or preserve shoreline physical processes. That is to say that movement of water and sediment along the shore. We want to maintain or enhance habitat function and diversity along the shore. We want to prevent or reduce pollutants from entering the aquatic environment. So from this perspective, we don't want to just look at what happens at that interface between land and water, but we want to consider what happens uphill from the shoreline, because we all know that water runs downhill. And then finally, we want practices that avoid or reduce cumulative impacts. Those 4 principles have been put into 2 credit and ratings guides. The top, on your top right, you can see Green Shores for Shoreline Development, which is for commercial, multifamily, residential, subdivision, park and institutional properties. So in other words, larger scale projects. And then the one on the bottom right, Green Shores for Homes, which is obviously, as it sounds like, for residential properties. They both are guides for being able to develop properties or have projects that are shore friendly. So it's not just about design guidance, because we found having guidance is one thing, but you need to support that guidance. And so we established a Green Shores for Local Government working group, of which the town of Qualicum Beach and the Comox Valley Regional District are members. We have training, which is offered to the general public, introduction to Green Shores, Green Shores Level 2, which is advanced, which is aimed at practitioners. And then finally, we have a new course coming out this month, which is called Green Shores Level 3, which people who successfully complete the course can be Green Shores approved professional. And the idea here is we want to encourage folks to be able to use the credit and rating system to design better projects. And then finally, we have certification for projects. So what about this Green Shores Incentives Project? We have this great idea, Green Shores. We want to see the impact of that. But we've found that in addition to having all those pieces, doing some research into what kind of incentives can be offered would be interesting and helpful to move from that idea to actual have impact. So the Green Shores Incentives Project basically will offer and track incentives in 2 pilot communities, CVRD and Qualicum Beach. We're also working with others to increase policies in alignment with those Green Shores principles. We're increasing access to Green Shores education and training. And then finally, we're going to analyze the feasibility of using incentives, policies, and education to increase climate resilient activities such as Green Shores projects. So tonight, we're going to be focusing in on the incentives, which are the shoreline assessment and understanding and assistance with Green Shores for Homes project design through this neighborhood scale project. I do want to mention that the funding for this aspect of this project, this incentives project, is provided by the Pacific Salmon Foundation and the Real Estate Foundation of BC, along with in-kind support from our partners, including the local governments, the local government working group, the Green Shores Technical Advisory Committee. And I do want to give special thanks to Northwest Hydraulics Consultants for all their work on this project, as well as their in-kind support, because they've really stepped up to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Jessica Wilson.
Thanks so much, DG. Just give me a moment here. I think you should be able to see my screen here. So myself and my principal and senior coastal engineer, Grant Lamont, we put together this report, concept designs for neighborhood scale coastal adaptation measures in Royston and Qualicum Beach. Before we get into the kind of nitty gritty of this, I just wanted to give special thanks to obviously the Stewardship Center for BC, who kind of is leading and driving this project. Sarah Bonner is from Aquaparian Environmental Consulting, and she actually provided the environmental and habitat input for this project. Obviously, the Comox Valley Regional District and the town of Qualicum Beach have been incredible supporters of this project. And then the Real Estate Foundation of BC and the Pacific Salmon Foundation have also provided funding. So we are going to go over the drivers for these projects, the study sites, which are in Royston and Qualicum Beach, the design concepts that we came up with, several challenges to these type of projects, and then a few closing statements. So first off, anyone who's been to the waterfront, you know that storms, waves, and erosion, they all occur on much larger scales than kind of the 1 to 10 meters. These processes we know occur on hundreds of meters and kilometer scales. And of course, this poses a real challenge for protecting individual properties from erosion and flooding. And often this challenge leads to hard armoring of the shoreline, because that's a solution that can be done on a small property. And this often makes things quite a lot worse. As you can see in this kind of top photo here, waves are approaching a seawall and they're hitting the seawall and amplifying, and waves are going over top, and often this leads to scouring and erosion at the toe of the seawall. So often what you've tried to do as a solution is actually causing more issues, and can cause issues for your neighbors as well. And neighborhood scale kind of Green Shores approaches, they provide a really good alternative to this type of hard approach, and they may function on a much more appropriate scale for coastal processes. And the initiative we're talking about today focuses on this kind of neighborhood scale, more natural approach, specifically for 2 sites in Qualicum Beach and Royston. So I'm sure you all know where these sites are already, since it seems like most of you are residents. But the Gartley Beach Royston site is kind of located just east of Royston and south of Comox. The Seacroft Qualicum Beach site is located on the west side of Qualicum Beach. And the Gartley Beach Royston site, I mean, it's a really very interesting site, especially if you've been down there. Looking at the air photos, you can really see it's located on the historical remnants of a river delta fan, and you can see the rivers kind of incised, the river channels incised into the foreshore. And this area provides really valuable foreshore habitat for spawning and shorebirds, and its composition is really very varied. At the north end of the site, there are these 2 properties that you can see here, and they're protected by hard armoring at the moment. And one is protected with the sloping concrete revetment, and the one directly adjacent to it is protected with a riprap revetment. These kind of very traditional shoreline structures. And they're surrounded by these beautiful established marshes on either side. And you can kind of imagine, given the surroundings, that a more natural shoreline solution might actually work really well, because there's a precedence for it right next to these. In the central portion of the site, right here, you have this incredibly valuable marsh habitat, and it's on this really coarse and mildly sloping beach. And this marsh already serves to protect the shoreline from erosion, it dissipates wave energy, and it's going to be incredibly resilient to sea level rise. In this location, it's already functioning so well that you really want to take like a first do no harm approach, and you almost don't want to do anything So we kind of didn't do a design for the central portion. At the south end of the site, you have this mildly sloping gravel beach that extends quite far to the south. It has established vegetation on the upper beach, woody debris on the crest, and it kind of fronts a number of different properties. And this beach is almost exactly what you would try to do if you were designing a Green Shores type project. In fact, like I've designed projects that look very similar to this. The problem is that it's somewhat low lying. And this means that, as sea levels rise, it's going to become susceptible to flooding, especially wave induced flooding. And what you don't want is for all of these properties that currently have a natural shoreline to go and start building revetments and seawalls, which triggers their neighbor to build a revetment and seawall, all to protect against sea level rise. So the question in this location is, what can you actually do here to be proactive and build off what is clearly already working? Moving to Qualicum Beach, the shoreline here is located within the Parksville-Qualicum Wildlife Management Area that has, incredibly important habitat value, and there's some permitting kind of restrictions around that as well. And as Luke was kind of mentioning, back in the mid 1900s, this section of shoreline, it had this extensive and elevated, mildly sloping beach, a lot of it which was quite sandy. And over time, it's been extensively armored. The beach has deflated, it's lowered its profile, and it's really left only coarse material behind, because that coarse material is more stable when you have all this wave reflection off the seawalls. And it's made the upper intertidal almost completely non-existent. So it kind of looks like this now, where you have this really low beach. There's no upper intertidal. There's no habitat on that upper intertidal, and really coarse material. And here, the aim may be to try and restore what was previously there as much as possible. And the regime has changed. The coastal processes have changed a little bit, but you'll try and do that as much as you can. So moving along to the Green Shores design concepts, at the north site, which is in Gartley Beach, we wanted to mimic those beautiful, natural, established marshes. And to do this, we needed to provide, a method to kind of protect the leading edge of it, because you don't, to recreate the marshes in entirety, be a huge amount of volume of material. So what we did is you can kind of create these marsh terraces where you can have a steeper slope by having a cobble kind of front leading edge. And then you have these terraced marshes which blend into the adjacent marshes really well. In cross section, the design looks like this. So you can see, you have this steep cobble and a lower marsh terrace, another steep cobble face, and a lower marsh terrace. And this really helps to reduce erosion. It helps to protect the upland property from wave run up and sea level rise. And it adds immense habitat value to this area that really didn't have a lot of habitat before. At the south end of Gartley Beach, we really wanted to make the existing functioning beach and expand on that, and as well as add resiliency to sea level rise. So we extended the beach up and onto the waterfront properties, and we vegetated it. And the change is so subtle and natural that almost you can't even notice it at first glance, but I'll kind of point your attention to this pole here that I added to the images, and it's got markers on it. And you can see after the design is implemented, there's only kind of 2 markers left. So in cross section, it looks a bit like this. So one of the great aspects of this project is that you can build this berm up as sea level rise in conjunction with the rate of sea level rise. And you can also expand it laterally, so along the shoreline, to include more and more properties. A note on this is because the berm is porous, it's made out of gravel, it's kind of unlike a dike. So a dike will try and keep the water out, whereas a berm will allow waves to run up and then allow any waves that manage to overtop it to run back into the ocean, so that you don't get as much ponding of water behind it, and it doesn't need to be quite as high. So in Seacroft, in Qualicum Beach, we wanted to reestablish a natural beach profile. Of course, here this is really difficult because the beach has lowered so much and you have all these structures. So you have to get a bit creative here. And the kind of solution you come up with is, well, we want to nourish the beach with gravel. But if we put a bunch of gravel in there, it's not going to be stable. And so how do you stabilize it? Well, you know, you can stabilize it with these little headland features. And if any of you have been to kind of like one of the pocket beaches in Tofino, for example, you see these rock headland features, and then these very stable beaches inside of them. And so you're almost creating that on a smaller scale here. And what you're doing is you're providing just enough sediment that the beach is stable, so you're not taking sediment out of the system anymore. And this kind of differentiates this kind of design from traditional groins or other structures where often you put in a groin and you don't nourish the beach. A key component of this is you nourish the beach so that it's compatible with sediment processes. And so the headlands help stabilize the beach, and then the vegetation on the upper slope, you know, provides this habitat value and then provides the secondary service of stabilizing the upper beach as well. So in plan view, these are kind of the headlands here, 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 and here. And you can kind of see that there's approximately one headland for every 2 properties or so. And if you were to walk kind of down the beach and in between the headlands, you'd be kind of walking down this cross section here. It's a nice mild slope that anybody can kind of walk down. And if you were to walk down the beach, you know, right behind the headlands, you'd be walking down the second cross section here, where you can really see as a person standing on the beach that you can still see over the headlands. And at, you know, high water, these headlands are just above, so they're still emergent. And so those are kind of the general design summary. And I just want to get into a few challenges, and a lot of these kind of relate to shoreline protection projects in general. And so some of, you know, protecting shorelines just, it isn't cheap. There are design costs, construction costs, and maintenance costs. And for neighborhood scale projects, the really nice thing is that many of these costs can be shared or at least lessened. And design costs kind of involve a whole number of steps, including coastal engineering studies, habitat assessments, preliminary and detailed design, permitting support, construction reviews, and all of these costs can reach up to $50,000, more or less. These are kind of typical costs that really depend on project specifics. But the kind of, you know, the takeaway from this is that it costs very little extra to take a design for one small project and scale it up to a larger project that spans multiple properties. And so these kind of design costs can be almost entirely shared. For construction costs, we did cost out these 3 designs that I've gone over here, and they cost anywhere from $1,500 to $6,600 per lineal meter. And for reference, like a typical rock revetment is going around the $5,000 plus range, and a seawall $8,000 to $10,000 plus per lineal meter. And so, you know, these are comparable, if not significantly cheaper. You know, it depends on the site, depends on the exact project specifics. But something to note, of course, specific to neighborhood scale approaches is that economies of scale apply here. So the bigger the project site is, the cheaper the project becomes. And maintenance costs, they don't have typical costs for, but they do vary significantly based on the lifespan of the project, the type of project itself, and the risk tolerance of the homeowners as well. But the good news is, of course, similarly to the construction costs, a lot of these costs can be shared. As I mentioned previously, the scale of the project matters, and neighborhood scale or larger nature-based projects, they are more likely to succeed. So it's really hard to get a project that has a 10-meter frontage to work when you're working with coastal processes that scale hundreds of meters. And then lastly, all these projects need to go through a permitting process. I won't go into the details of the permitting process and all the different approvals and procedures you need to go through, It's all detailed in the report. But it's a fairly lengthy process, and there are uncertain outcomes, particularly if you're using like a hard revetment or a seawall. The good news is that Green Shores projects are being looked at very favorably. You know, you heard from the CVRD that they're looking at these types of projects favorably, for example, and this can really help to ease the process. So to end the presentation, I'll just say that, you know, the scale of erosion and flooding problems is typically well beyond what an individual property owner can kind of manage. And these types of natural Green Shores approaches applied on a neighborhood scale have a really massive potential to provide cost savings and be able to meet these needs. And the concepts, you know, we outlined today, you know, they're conceptual design right now, but they could pretty easily be pushed forward to detailed design and construction, implemented and serve to protect the upland homeowners in these locations. And as a last note, every site is different, and site-specific designs should always be completed, but these projects do serve as references for what is possible and what kind of projects are supported by these communities that they're in. So that's everything I have. So I guess we'll open it up to questions.
Great, thanks very much, Jessica. So we have time for some questions here, and I'm gonna maybe Jessica, you can stop sharing so folks can see everybody. There we are. So if you would like to turn on your videos, you can, and if anybody has any questions for Jessica or for myself or folks from Qualicum Beach or CVRD. Any questions? Okay, I see Maria has one. So do you know how to turn off unmute yourself? There you go.
Yes, I do. Thanks.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand this. So this is a consulting kind of thing done by the city. Is that right? What it is? It's consulting for shorelines and to do natural shorelines.
So maybe I'll have a go at that, Jessica.
Sure.
So basically the Stewardship Center recognized that having a neighborhood scale design and the background, coastal studies to support that design would be helpful to property owners who are considering a nature-based approach. So we received the funding from the Real Estate Foundation and the Pacific Salmon Foundation to hire Northwest Hydraulics to complete this study for us. And so now we're sharing the study, and we're working in collaboration with CVRD and the town of Qualicum Beach, if that answers your question.
Okay, so what if our community decided to do a project, let's say, to repair, because we're on Gartley Road. I'm one of the Gartley Road people. So our beach is pretty busy. It has a lot of people in the summertime that enjoy our beach and stuff. My point is though, who on the beach would pay for it? All the homes that are on the beach have to coordinate to pay for this, or is there funding for this?
Yeah, great question, Maria. So basically, we would provide this study and the preliminary concepts to the property owners in the two study areas at no cost. And then the cost for construction would be up to the property owners themselves.
I see. So that would be quite costly for some of the homes here, especially that particular one that you mentioned with the concrete. The history of that was that it was a business at one point. I'm not sure. I've only been here a couple of years, so I'm not sure. So it was created because it was a boat place, I believe, that fixed boats and and they had a ramp there and stuff like that. So that was why it's there. It's not, it doesn't look very nice, and I'm sure the homeowners don't think it looks great either. But I can't speak for them. It would be nice. I like the way the natural shorelines are. It makes total sense what you've said. I don't see it. I don't see people being able to afford to do that.
Okay, thanks very much, Maria. I don't know whether Robin or Alana, you would like to comment on moving things forward.
Sure. Thanks, DG. Hi, Maria. It's Alana. I work for the CVRD, but I'm also one of those very lucky folks to live in this area and love to go to Royston and Gartley Beach. And we have for sure seen an uptick in visitors in the last couple of years there. I think from the planning perspective, we regularly talk with property owners who have questions about how, either because they have an existing riprap structure, maybe they didn't install it, maybe they did, maybe it's starting to fail, or we also talk with a lot of folks who are interested in new construction, and their default very often is that they need to have some kind of a seawall or riprap structure to protect their investment. And so when we started talking with DG about this opportunity to participate, that's really the lens that we were coming from, knowing that a big part of this initiative and this incentive for our community is around the education. So to let folks know that there are some other options, because as Jessica noted, if people are moving to the idea that they need to do some kind of intervention or installation, it's going to be very costly, no doubt about it. And so our interest is not to minimize the cost of that. We very much appreciate that, but to let folks know that if they will consider working as a neighborhood, having some of these conversations, that you could end up with the kind of benefits that are described in these concepts, and share some of those costs over a number of properties. On the grant question, we are always keeping our eyes open for grants that could support property owners to do this kind of work. So yes, as DG said, the cost would be to the property owners, but we're very mindful of the cost, and so would keep our eye out to support a neighborhood or community that wanted to try to do something like this in order to conserve what they have, or to remediate areas that have been hardened in the past.
Great. I see Grant.
I just wanted to add one thing too on costs. We've done some studies on the cost of projects.
Grant, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I had to pick up my daughter this evening, so I missed the introductions. My name is Grant Lamont. I'm a senior coastal engineer with Northwest Hydraulic Consultants. And so for the cost of seawalls, they can often be either as expensive or more expensive than the cost of construction of a green shores or a soft shore solution. And one of the interesting things about this study is looking at a neighborhood scale solution. If you get together with a couple of your neighbors, whatever engineering costs there are, and for this the pilot sites, a lot of the engineering is already done, which is really one of the nice benefits of this study for people in these neighborhoods. But you can go forward with a design that's probably going to come in less expensive. So if the neighborhood gets to a point where individual property owners are like, oh, I'm worried about my shoreline, I'm worried about these winter storms. One of the great outcomes of this study, as Alana alluded to, is here's another option. You don't have to consider the seawall, and you might actually save money collectively as a group of property owners adopting a technique like this.
Thanks very much, Grant. I see there's a question from Virginia, and I think I'll send this to Alana. Is there any consideration of a Green Shores project along the shoreline from Goosebit to Curtis Beach with future sewage construction, the decommissioning of the force main along the beach?
Well, thanks, Virginia, very much for the question. So to those of you who might not be familiar with this area, this is also known as the Willamar Bluffs. This is an eroding sand bluff. And what we've seen over the years, in part, installation of sewage force main that interrupted a lot of the sediment transfer that previously fed Goosebit. Goosepit is a regional park, and so we do have some opportunity to do some of this kind of work. And yes, I guess I would say that the short answer is yes. Internally at the staff level, we're absolutely looking at Goosepit and potentially in the Willamar Bluffs area about options for employing some of these treatments. One of the challenges, of course, as you know, if you're familiar with the Bluffs, is that I think now, with the exception of one property, the toe of the bluff is entirely hardened. And so there are some challenges there. And I don't know if Jessica and Grant could speak to this much better than I. You know, what's the impact if you've got a whole series of hardened, or the ability if you have a series of hardened shore and you have one or two owners, for example, within that grouping who want to go green shores. So I don't want to put them on the spot to speak specifically to that environment, but that is one of the challenges there.
I can speak a little bit to that. I was actually just recently involved in the beach nourishment there to nourish the beach above the forest main. That's a really interesting area because, as Alana said, those bluffs historically were feeding the sediment for the entire Goosepit. Like Goosepit was formed because you had all of these erosion processes, and that erosion led to deposition of sediment downdrift. So as soon as the toe of the bluffs became armored, you took away the sediment supply. And so now your system, if you thought of it as a closed system, you took away everything coming into that system, but there's still material leaving. And that's what causes erosion of Goosepit. So, I mean, I can't say, whether there's consideration for a Green Shores approach there, but it's definitely a system that could benefit from one. That's about all I can say.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks very much, Jessica. So I have a question from the chat, and then I think I have Eleanor. So I'll just do the question from the chat first. Do you have examples of other neighborhoods that have successfully worked together to protect their shorelines? For example, Washington states or coastal communities in Florida, et cetera. And great question there, Ryan. Washington State basically was the inspiration for this project in their shore-friendly initiative. But they really did focus on single family homes, offering these assessments and engineering studies. So I think we've basically ramped it up one level. And so I'm actually not familiar with any that did the neighborhood scale. I don't know whether Jessica or Grant, in your searching around, whether you've seen any studies to that effect.
I'm not aware of any in BC. I know, Grant, we were reviewing a project earlier today on a community scale that used the beach nourishment. I think you can talk to that one better than myself.
Yeah, in Washington State on the West Coast in Willapa Bay down towards the south part of Washington. There's very few so far that have been done by groups of property owners. Probably the best examples of groups of property owners and communities getting together that I'm aware of are in England, southeastern England, on that coast and the east coast of England. There's been a number of examples. There's also been other examples around Europe. Most of them have seed funding or some significant funding from local government or even a more federal government type level. So they're, it's kind of a new and emerging problem. There's ongoing initiatives in California around community scale protection. There's becoming a general recognition. It's kind of, I don't want to say leading edge, I don't like that term, but there's an ongoing recognition right now that leaving property owners to their own device creates this hodgepodge of solutions on the shorelines, and that's not good for a given beach, because a beach scale is much bigger than a property scale. So yeah, there are many examples of larger scales, including actually in in Massachusetts, near Boston, and some of the coastline on the east coast of the US. There's also, but again, all the projects I'm thinking of are more government funding, Army Corps of Engineers, larger scale projects that are funded on a large level. North Carolina, Outer Banks, some areas, there've been some large beach nourishment projects there as well.
Yeah,
So sorry, I'm not giving you a very specific example, and certainly not one in BC. So.
Thanks, Grant. And I, thinking about it a little bit more, there is one project that's enrolled down in Victoria, or outside of Victoria, where it's two properties that are side by side that are working together. And the Green Shores for Homes, the credit you actually get a credit for working with your neighbors. So the more neighbors you work with, the more points you get for that particular credit. So we really do encourage, Green Shores really does encourage this collaboration. And we did have one property owner up on Savory Island who was trying to get his neighbors to all work together, and they had some other issues with Ministry of Transportation. They had a very funny thing where they had an easement of MOTI in between the property lines and the shoreline, which is a whole nother story, another crazy planning thing from Savory Island. But there is, I think there's some precedent for doing that, working together to do things on this scale. So I think I have Eleanor. Did you have a comment? You just have to unmute yourself there. Still muted. And usually it's the bottom left. Okay. Maybe while she's trying to unmute herself. Oh, are you there? No, we've lost her. Another question? Okay, Joanne, while Eleanor's trying to get unmuted there. Go ahead.
I just wanted to share an experience we had on Hornby Island at Shingle Spit. We tried to work with our neighbors. We couldn't afford a full engineered design project. But we did do a lot of research about beach nourishment. So we did get a contractor to do some groins and lots of gravel to create a bit of a berm to try and stop the erosion process that we've been having there. And we think it's linked to a huge breakwater that BC Ferries put in that blocked that natural flow of the gravel along the spit, because we've been there since 1974 and we've really noticed the beach dropping. So maybe this is more of it's an experience that I could just share with anyone thinking of going ahead without an engineered design, because I think you really need that expertise. Because for us, the berm has pretty much disappeared in the big winter storms, and we still have the groins that's hopefully holding things back, but it's quite scary. We've lost 20 feet of foreshore.
Great, thanks, Joanne. I don't know, engineers in the group want to comment on that?
I can just say that, I mean, like one of the things that maybe differentiates like a good coastal engineering and nature-based design is exactly what you've said, which is the incorporation of these kind of understanding of sediment transport processes. And one of the things that we typically do, at the very first step is look at old ortho photos and try and understand what the processes occurring are. And so before you come up with a solution, you have to understand the processes, and then you come up with a solution that's very specific to the site. And sometimes in more traditional methods of engineering, that kind of process understanding is maybe missed a little bit. So, I mean, yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And if you're aware of BC Ferries ever contributing to a project when maybe their breakwater and dock is causing the trouble?
Not that I'm aware of. Grant, I don't know if you've heard of anything.
Not per se for individual property owners. I mean, I know they've done lots of work on the causeway. As the causeway, they've been trying to improve the habitat around the causeway at Roberts Bank, their terminal at Swanson, and other places, but no, not per se. And just to reiterate what Jessica says, I mean, we're very fortunate at Northwest Hydraulic Consultants. We have a couple of coastal geomorphologists who work hand in hand with our coastal engineering team. So we really try and understand those beach processes. It really is a multidisciplinary thing if you're going to approach these designs to get the input of geomorphologists, coastal engineers, who we can provide that input on the wave forces, and then also marine biologists who can identify where sensitive or critical habitat is. Because if you're not aware of that and you start designing your project and you say, I'm going to put this big structure right down in some sensitive habitat, well, if you can't get permitted, or if DFO is going to come back and say, no, you can't touch that area, you have to be able to design around that. So it's really important to have all that really early in the design process, so you don't waste people's time and money considering designs that just aren't going to get permitted or aren't going to work. So.
Okay.
I have another question here from Greg. Through the design phase here that is created, is it mostly focused on physical processes, or were biotic function also accounted for in the suggested designs?
Yeah, we had input from Sarah Bonner and Aquaparian. There's not, I mean, there were several different things that were considered because of in these project sites, there was already a lot of upland urban development, but there was still thought given to connectivity of the shoreline from the upland to the beach. A seawall creates a real barrier to that connectivity that can exist for natural flow. And then also on the beach itself, thought was given to sediment grain size and forage fish. But the main driver is physical process, in the sense that if you try and build something for a certain grain size, but if it's going to just get washed out by the winter storm waves and not going to be there the next year, then there's not a lot of value in that. You can't really ask homeowners to spend tens and even $100,000 to put sediment on a beach if it's going to get washed away within 1 or 2 winters.
And thanks, Grant, and I'll also speak to that, and that the designs that NHC came up with would meet Green Shore's design. So if you go back to those 4 guiding principles, one is about shoreline processes, the other is maintaining or enhancing habitat function. So that is definitely considered in the design, and these designs are consistent with those 4 guiding principles. So thanks very much, Greg, for that question. And I see that Eleanor has managed to turn her microphone on. So if you have a question.
I do, thank you. And thanks to my son-in-law who dashed down to help me. I have a couple of questions. The first one is all of this work done entirely on the property of the homeowner, or does it extend out onto the public beach?
Yeah, so I can answer that. So the north end of Gartley Beach, it almost extends entirely onto the public beach just because of the extent of it. That being said, that what is extending onto public property is really consistent with kind of what's naturally there, so the marsh and cobble material. The south end of Gartley Beach, the gravel berm, that's entirely on the individual property owner's land, because you're building back onto the land and not seaward onto public property. And then the Qualicum Beach sites again is seaward of the seawalls that are presently there. So that's on natural or on public property. That being said, one of the questions that kind of commonly comes up about the Qualicum Beach designs is, is this going to be accessible to the public? And that's one of the reasons we kind of show those cross sections, which is to say that if you were walking along the shoreline, you know, you'd walk up a slope, but it would feel very natural. It would be a natural kind of beach slope and vegetation, and it wouldn't, you know, it would be consistent with the public area.
Great.
So, and what kind of then, what kind of studies are done before any of this is done as to what the current ecological system is and how this will impact on it? Like, we have thousands of tiny crabs scrambling in front of our house. And if you dump gravel or whatever, just as an example, if you decide you're going to dump some gravel, will that not impact their habitat? And who does that study? Is it independently done? And what is the responsibility of the CVRD in this regard?
Jessica, I can take that one. It's Alana. So here in the electoral areas of the CVRD, we have something called a development permit area for our entire shoreline, our entire coastal shoreline. So if folks are considering doing any alteration of that shoreline, they would hopefully begin with us for that initial conversation about what kind of permit is required. And one of the application requirements for the development permit is something that we call the biophysical assessment. And really we're looking for someone who has, most of the time we get folks who are registered professional biologists to give that lens on the marine environment from the flora and fauna perspective and the ecosystem interconnectivity. And then so that work would be coupled with whomever the property owner is working with to do the engineering side of it.
So that would be another cost to add on.
It's part of the permit. Yeah.
Okay.
And I am, well, how do people, we are out of time. So is your question kind of a short one there, Eleanor, or we could?
It's not a long one. It's,
okay.
Our beach gets terrific storms. The sand moves 10 houses down, the whole sand, and 30 feet logs are lifted up on their end, 3-foot diameter. They're lifted up on end and moved down 4 houses. What is to ensure us? I find it very hard to believe that these things are going to stay in place. These natural, a little bit of gravel and some marsh plantings. I just question that where I am, we're not seeing erosion, but we do watch the sand move down the beach and back up every year. The waves here seem to have just tremendous power to move what exists on the beach.
This is it's a really good question, and I guess I'll try and keep it short here. But I mean, there's kind of two main things. We are really trying to work with whatever the site-specific constraints are, and to look at what is already there and what is working and expand on that. So we know, for example, that at the North Gartley, that there is already a marsh there that is, it's on cobble material and gravel material. It's got an established vegetation and it is stable. So it is very reasonable to assume that if you put down similar material and similar vegetation, and you monitor it and you maintain it and that kind of thing, that it will also be stable, because the incident wave conditions and the kind of processes that are driving things at that site are the same, at those 2 revetments as they are at the 2 marshes adjacent to it. And the same thing goes for the 2 other sites. You're really looking at what's there, what's working, what's been happening over time. And if something's already working well, like the gravel beach at the south end of Gartley Beach, can we just expand that? Can we allow it to adapt inland as sea levels rise and not even mess with the processes? Say those processes are going to continue, and we're just going to, allow it to continue at a slightly higher elevation.
Thanks very much, Jessica. I think these are all some really fantastic questions, and I want to thank everybody for attending. There were a couple of more questions in the chat that we've taken note of, and we will answer those questions, I believe, post them on a Q&A on the websites for CVRD and Town of Qualicum Beach. So we can do the follow-up. Really appreciate you taking the time out of this lovely evening here on the BC coast. And thanks very much to Jessica for presenting the results of the study, and the report as well the whole report as well will be posted, so you can dive into that and have a little bit of evening reading. So on that note, I'd like to wish everybody a lovely rest of your evening, and thanks very much for attending. We'll see you all soon. Bye.
DG, are we going to make these slides available as well?
Yes, the slides will be available as well. Yeah.
That would be great, Jessica. I can collect everything and then share it with Luke.
Robin.
Good night.
Okay, good night.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank
Real
you.
pleasure. Thank you. Okay, so we've got captured the chat, which is great. And there we are. I think we're good. And stop recording.
I actually removed a couple of people.
Did you let it?
I did, because I thought, did they not realize they need to get out?
I think they're waiting for it to shut down for them, right?
Maybe.
Mhm.